Hello and welcome to episode number 149 of Daily Global Insights with Sri and Sri. Today is the 26th of April and here are the main points. United States to provide India with raw material for COVID vaccines by a stark 46% to 15% margin. The US border security is worse today than before, says a Fox poll. Phase 1 trials of Bharat Biotech Nasal Vaccine are in progress, and we will be looking a little bit at the details of the Fox poll that was released today. Sir, your initial thoughts about the first 100 days of Biden. These are all, pointers to what he has been doing.
I think the first 100 days of Mr. Biden, the curated numbers point that he has got a 52% approval. We have seen the poll results come out from Fox. The numbers is a stark reality as to how this 52% comes up. When you look at infrastructure, when you look at the immigration, when you look at the overall security, when you also look at the general state of affairs in terms of crimes in various states. So the numbers have the gun control laws that is being promulgated, whether it's really going to address. So we look at the numbers, but my first reaction is that the mainstream media with the Democrats have given a very good curated narrative in terms of Biden's progress. Having said that, Biden has executed maniacally using his bare minimum advantage in Senate and slender majority in House and a combination of executive orders to pursue the agenda that he promised to the voters. On that, he gets a very high score. Doesn't matter. He hasn't been swayed. He has kind of moved on that in a relentless manner.
So we will today start with global COVID updates because there's much that is happening. The United States has decided to provide India with raw material for COVID vaccines. Anthony Fauci says that US will consider sending AstraZeneca vaccine to COVID hit India, EU to send medicine and oxygen for virus hit India, and looking to help and support India, says Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, and phase 1 trials of Bharat Biotech nasal vaccines are in progress. Sir, with all these said, everything around in India, I'm going to put up a quick summary of where things stand with respect to India today. And these will be a form of a slideshow, sir. And I would like to let you know that I'm on the first thing, which is the total status as on the 25th of April, 2021. So take it away.
Great. Just to give you headline numbers, out of 17 million cases, 14.085 million have recovered, 2.682 million active, and 192,000 deaths. Overall, when you look at the headline numbers, the recovery rate is extraordinary relative to what we witnessed around in United States when we had such peak numbers flowing through. We had almost 24 to 26%, 28% of the people active relative to what you see here by way of the active number to the recovered numbers. Even the death, is very relatively, I think 1.18 or 1.14 or less than 1.2% the death rate. But having said that, the visibility of suffering in concentrated number of states is making this very exacerbated. People suffering from oxygen, lack of beds, lack of hospitals, and vaccines waiting for raw materials, all make it a case of how you address this issue. And this is not the right time for people to hold up raw materials, etc., when a nation needs enormous amount of support.
And sir, now we are looking at the top 12 states that have been hit the most with the coronavirus, starting with Maharashtra.
One of the unusual things that India is witnessing is almost 40% of the active cases and total cases concentrated in one specific state, and which stands out, which is Maharashtra. When you take a look at these top 12 states, they roughly make up between 60 to 70% of the cases. So Maharashtra has got 4.2 million total cases, and then the discharged or recovered is 3.46 million. Again, when you look at the number of deaths, which is 63,000 or 64,000 in a total of 192, is greater than 30%. Or close to 30%. So the numbers are staggering in terms of the concentration of locations. So Kerala, 1.37 million total cases in terms of the total confirmed cases by second. You can see the difference between Maharashtra and Kerala by way of numbers. 1.17 million discharged, which is almost 200,000 people active. That's roughly 10% of the total. Then you have the deaths, which is very modest, 5,080 relative to the number, and which means they have managed the environment reasonably well. Karnataka, 1.304 million, of which 1.055 discharged, and then you have 14,283. So you can see Maharashtra, Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, UP, Andhra Pradesh, Bengal, Delhi, they make up, even Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat, the total number of cases may be greater than 4 million. But when you look at the number of deaths and when you look at the number of discharge, it's a very small number, when you look at Rajasthan to Gujarat. So if you manage 9 states effectively, and especially if you contain Maharashtra and Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, to some extent even Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is out of 1.05, only 10,959, and 752,000 have been discharged. So you're talking about, 752,000 has been discharged. So you're talking about less than 250,000 people active. You believe that you can begin to address the issues.
And we are now looking at, sir, the medium hit states such as Haryana, Odisha, Telangana, and so on.
Yeah, these are the lower strata of states where the numbers range from 40,000 cases to about 3.7 million cases. You can see Haryana, Odisha, and Telangana and Bihar, right up to Jharkhand, right up to Assam is about 2 million to the 4 million cases. Then it slides down quite rapidly.
So it's not again, 2 million, sir. It's 235,000. Assam is 235,000.
Sorry, Assam is 235,000. Yep. Yeah. So my apologies. Then you have, yes, it's 332, 390, 395, 401. So these are all 400, less than 500,000 cases. My apologies, less than 500,000 total confirmed cases. And then you will find, the active number of cases in most instances is probably, less than, starting with less than 60,000. So 60,000 per state in these 12 states. So relatively in the smaller states, either they have managed it well, or, they have the facilities to deal with the issues, or the variants have not spread. They seem to be concentrated in those top 5 to 6 states. In fact, we put it as 9 states. So I think in the second category, I think we see that that there is plenty of opportunity to make sure that they don't do lockdowns and shutdowns. Lockdowns and shutdowns have not worked. If anybody needs empirical evidence, they can look at India itself. But you need to come to United States to look at how non-lockdown states have performed relative to lockdown states.
And then we have to close it out, we have the really less afflicted areas such as Chandigarh, Tripura, northeastern states, where it is even less than that, less than 40,000 confirmed cases. Sir, if you want to touch upon that.
No, I think that what it means is that, they've done a great job. 12 states, these are relatively small populations spread mostly in northeast, and then some in the western, and then 2 of them in the outer periphery. They have managed it well up in the north as well. They have managed in Jammu as well as in is it Jammu right up the Ladakh and Ladakh is the one which has got Chandigarh and Ladakh. Chandigarh and Ladakh. Chandigarh is about 37,000, and then Ladakh is about 13,000 cases. That's number 1 and number 7. Then, from rest of the states are located in the northeast. Then you have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You also have the Lakshadweep, relatively. So if you break up these 36 states combined, consisting of union territories and states, India seems to be, if we can concentrate on those top 9 states, it may be able to very quickly turn its head on the COVID situation.
And in the United States itself, a fully open Texas and Florida are reporting fewer COVID instances than the Democrat led states such as New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. So there appears to be a contra indication here. The more you lock down, looks like the more the COVID rages. So, I mean, I'm trying to make sense of this, sir. What are your thoughts? Why is this happening, you think?
So going back about a year. This I'm talking about March to mid-April 2020. One of the doctors, whom I know and from whom I take treatment, he had contact. He's one of the first 100 people who had contracted COVID-19. Those days protocols were just still evolving. Data was insufficient. Then he recovered, spending almost took 7 weeks, 8 weeks for him to recover. Then he came out and he's a United Nations advisory member. And he spoke about what needs to be done and how he got out. Some of his key messages at that point of time was that people should not be locked down at that point of time beyond 90 days. Somewhere June to July, people should be allowed to go out, allowed to mix, allowed to be exposed to the atmosphere. People should wear masks, follow social distancing, and slowly advance or narrow the social distancing gap as they become acclimatized and more evolve into a community-based immunity system. But by locking down people for any time there is a first instance for what you call enormous amount of time is not very helpful in mitigating the advancement of this disease. And especially he pointed out to cities like Manhattan, where we have tall buildings and the air conditioning system, aircon system, becomes a conducive mechanism to propagate this disease. So wherever you have concentrated people, again, concentrated in buildings and rooms and blocks, and with no exposure to the atmosphere, is not a good way to mitigate. Now, as you can imagine, if you take Texas and Florida, they're broader states. They don't have tall structures in many places. They have no concentrated. The temperature, weather is much more hot, and people are more outdoors rather than indoors. So this is the secret, and obviously they have to follow. There was spurt in Florida when the markets, everybody went to the beach, and then the cases spurred up. But then they began to realize that you are open, but at the same time you have to exercise caution. That's the message that is coming through from Florida and Texas. Whereas we continue to think that we have to lock down and lock down and lock down. That's not very helpful. I think that's the message from this.
And in US news, let us take a look at some of the critical numbers that a Fox poll has found for President Biden.
So when we look at the Fox poll, the first item on the first numbers that prop up is around the border security. So people are saying that only 15% say now that they're better off relative to 46% who are saying that we are worse off compared to 2 years ago. So when you look at the numbers 2 years ago in 2018, who said, is 2 years ago, are we better? 28% say. 2 years ago, people say, are you worse off? 17%. 50% of the people 2 years ago stated that, it's the same. There's constant attempt to cross the border, which is the reason why President Trump at that point of time embarked on this big border wall initiative, which was contentious, much contentious. Eventually it started and made its progress until the Democrats stopped it, and now they want to start it again. So when you look at today, on a almost like 1-to-3 ratio, people are saying we are worse off, and numbers tell the story, and the polls are reflecting the same outcome. So When you look at the next set of data, which is around the five parameters: economy, gun laws, healthcare, infrastructure, and illegal immigration. Obviously, the state of economy, and then the gun laws, which is you have seen a number of incidents and the growth in crime. The healthcare, because it is going to and fro, and the Obama, what you call Obama expanded care is now coming into perspective. Then the infrastructure, which doesn't seem to be infrastructure, it seems to be a lot of wastage of expenditure when you look at the Republican proposal on the table, which is around $700 billion. And then look at the illegal immigration. When you look at this parameter, when you look at these numbers, you can see that people are either extremely or very concerned, and that percentages ranges from 67% to 78%. The reason why economy is at 78%, notwithstanding the markets being close to 11%, 9% up since all of this year, depending on which index you are talking about, the concern is around the taxation and corporate taxes, the taxes that are rising to basically feed and support the illegal immigrants, the capital gains tax that has come in, the estate duty, and I think the next to touch will be the personal income taxes that's likely to come. Clearly, Trump taxes, personal taxes are going to be repealed. So these are the things that make up the economy story as to why the percentage that people are very highly concerned. That number is a reflection of that. No need to discuss gun laws or healthcare or infrastructure or limit. We have discussed it, and these numbers just reinforce.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, sir. And let's take a quick look at the next news item, which is Putin and Biden may meet in June. Russia's media is reporting now. What do you think they will be discussing here, sir?
I think they will be discussing uh, three specific items. One, they're not going to be discussing climate accord, which is Biden's topic. He's coming out of, remember that his June it times coincides with the G7 summit, his meetings with EU. He is also addressing the NATO meeting. So that's his first overseas trip to UK and Brussels or Belgium. So I think on the sidelines, especially, he probably is. They're trying to schedule a meeting with Mr. Putin. So what are they going to discuss? They're going to discuss Ukraine. They're going to discuss whether interference in U.S. affairs, cyber attacks, etc. Those types of items, and then opening up the Kerch Strait and the Baltic waters. So Black Sea. So I think those are the topics that they would feature. I am sure they would also discuss COVID. As far as the green climate is concerned, I don't know whether Russia can be held at ever accountable for that, but I'm sure that topic may come up.
And Senator Lindsey Graham calls out Biden foreign policy as being destabilizing. This is a senior senator from the Republican side, and if he says this, there must be cause for concern, sir.
Afghanistan is a sore point for Mr. Lindsey Graham. Withdrawing troops from Afghanistan and placing reliance on Taliban to negotiate and to have a harmonious and peaceful integration with mainstream Afghan society. Lindsey Graham, who knows a lot about Afghanistan, doesn't believe in it. He has similar views on Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, and Kurd, as well as he is very much interventionist as far as Syria is concerned. Whether we agree with it or not is an entirely different point. And obviously, he's got concerns that the eyes are being taken off South China Sea, where we have the biggest threat.
And Vice President Kamala Harris says that migrant surges are not going to be solved overnight. You created the problem overnight, though.
Well, they created the problem overnight. We have to use this language. They call it as the migrant surge. So it's no longer illegal. So it's a migrant surge that is happening in the border. The words tell the perception of the mindset and the policy framework that Democrats have. They think that everybody who is coming here legally or illegally is now called as migrant or an aspiring migrant attempting to come in either to join the family or to in pursuit of work, and they should be encouraged. And by the way, Mr. George W. Bush, the former president, has also joined the fray and talks about sympathetic and compassionate approach in dealing with the border crisis. So Kamala Harris has no solution. So what does she say? She says that it's not going to be solved overnight. Well, as you rightly pointed out, they created the problem, and they have no ability to stop it right now.
This is going to come and bite them really, really badly in 2022. Even a political novice like me can tell you this is not going to end well for Democrats. Let's see how it plays out. Sir, Kentucky's Attorney General blasts Biden for polarizing the nation on racial injustice. What is the context under which he's saying this, sir?
The context is this Kia Bryant. The context is George Floyd. The context is the agitations that are spewing up. The context is you can see some of the afflicted communities, be it from African American or Latino or some of the crimes against the Asian, by taking sides with this approach called depolicing and swinging the stuff the other way and making a conspicuous difference like white and black. He's saying this is not very helpful. It's not going to create a social harmony. It's going to create permanent ripples in the society, and that's going to take quite a bit of time. Already we have challenges. You have woke culture now in corporations. You have seen the MLB game being postponed because they believe that the Georgian laws were biased against African American and prejudiced against some of the other less advantaged communities. So all these things put together in a nutshell, the Kentucky Attorney General is taking a blast.
And Senator Manchin rails against eliminating filibuster, supports targeted infrastructure bill, and opposes reconciliation. So even this bill, I don't think it's going to go down 50-50, sir, because Manchin is a Democrat, isn't he?
Manchin is a Democrat from West Virginia. Usually you have these 7 to 8 senators from the Republican Party. We generally have towed the line, like Cheney, Murkowski, and then Mitt Romney, and so on, and Pat, the Pennsylvania senator who is retiring. These people have. But on the infrastructure plan, the fact that these senators have come up with a number which we presented in 2 days ago, I think a Thursday or Friday in the DGI we presented, and that seems like a very reasonable plan. So Manchin is saying that plan is much more accommodative and supportive. It's very targeted. Second, he said, I'm not going to be in the Senate that is going to burst the filibuster and go down a path which is very much partisan in terms of getting the policies. You cannot have a partisan policy that becomes the national policy, notwithstanding the fact you may have a margin thin majority. Now, in a filibuster, you have a 2/3, that means at least you have a vast representation of the country. So that's his point around filibuster and on the infrastructure.
And in global news, Turkey summons US ambassador over the genocide announcement. So now things are beginning to heat up with US's friend Turkey, or would we say partner? What would be the status that one can best describe US and Turkey, sir?
The best way to describe US and Turkey is a convenient engagement on an opportunistic basis. So I don't know, they probably are healing to the Armenian scenario. And so it's long, Biden, a lot of Biden's policies is flip-flop. So today we have, they have summoned, Biden has announced recognizing the genocide. Obviously, that's one of the other progressive agenda items. Turkey has basically said, we don't accept it. Why are you kind of rewriting, going back in history and time? This is not the last word that we have heard. We'll hear something more in due course.
And 74% of Japanese support engagement in Taiwan Strait, according to a Nikkei poll. So looks like Japan is itching for a fight.
No, I think Japan is very concerned about the security. The Japanese are concerned about the security, especially I think Senkaku Island, where you have the fishermen. That's one area which is close to their territory. The second is the South China Sea as a strait. Japan is reliant on energy, food supplies, and other aspects. And you remember, Japan is the one which probably is preparing, also has had a long, war, and is preparing itself for what happens if you have a 200-day war or a 250-day war. So they have started to prepare and plan in the event of a war. If there is a blockade, what is, how the population needs to, how the country has to deal with, and how the supply chain needs to be dealt with. The COVID has certainly left them very sore and burnt. So now the next thing that needs to happen, or if it happens, the Taiwan Strait, it'll become very, very vulnerable in terms of its security. That's reflected in the pulse of the people.
And the sunken Indonesian submarine has been found to be split into three parts, and all 53 are dead. It is now confirmed. Sir, your thoughts on this?
I think my thoughts are that it's very, very sad. And the fact that it split into three, natural or unnatural, we don't know. But right now, the Indonesian Navy is confirming, Indonesian Army is confirming that they have now can confirm three, and all passengers are dead. They have found enough debris to make that specific case. Very sad. But Indonesian waters are very, very hostile. This is not the first, and this is not going to be the last incident.
And the French detained 5 amid terrorism investigation of a deadly police station attack. A little bit more information on this, sir. Where did this attack happen, and who are the people who have been detained?
I think that the attack happened around a police station in one of the suburban areas, and the policewoman was standing outside, and she was stabbed to death. The investigations revealed there's at least few people involved, of which the first 4 arrests have been made, and then the 5th arrest was made today. Many of them seem to be of either Tunisian or some origin of that category. So they've categorized it as a terrorist incident. Very interesting. We'll wait for some more data to come out, but it seems like the 5th person arrested. Their parents gave him an address, a location for him. We have very sketchy details, but when you look at the data, at least from a key headlines point of view, it looks like, I don't know whether it was orchestrated or whether it was what you call a knee-jerk response, an opportunity, identity, an opportunistic incident that happened. But the French are investigating, and you remember, France is the only country, and there's a couple of other European states have been taking a very strong stance in terms of by way of making sure that the French culture and identity is preserved and maintained, and people don't impose themselves. They've been tackling head on the issues of whatever you may want to call jihadism or Islamism or so. And you have seen the repercussions of the French issue in Pakistan. And to that extent, I think that there is either the embassy has withdrawn some of its staff. It clearly has issued warning to the French citizens if they happen to be in Pakistan to kind of move. Nothing to do with this incident, but wherever there is the reaction to the French laws, which have become far more stringent in dealing with these issues. Again, this is not the first time. We had the Charlie Hebdo issue, which was left to simmer until Macron came and took it head on.
And EU says now that CCP is endangering peace in South China Sea. This is a strong statement from EU. And Chinese Premier, should I say Prime Minister Li Keqiang,
Yes.
met with leaders from EU and Asia seeking support for the EU trade deal. And viewers, you know that there are 2 camps at least that we know of inside the CCP. One belongs to Xi Jinping, the other one is Li Keqiang, and this is moves from the other side, looks like, sir.
It's very interesting that this meeting occurred in Chengdu. Though the meeting is called as to encourage EU, there was, I think, 8 countries, Germany, France, Netherlands, Hungary, Japan, Korea, Singapore. where the countries at this meet, and Mr. Li Keqiang addressed the gathering and talked about, you're all doing business here, and there's no change to the business rules. We encourage you to exert your influence, and make sure that the EU deal comes through. Obviously, France, Germany, Netherlands are most very influential members. They added Hungary to that list as well. It's interesting that it is, as you rightly said, is the second camp rather than the first camp.
And in Indian news, BHEL commences supply of oxygen from Bhopal and Haridwar facilities. Indian Railways delivers 150 tons of medical oxygen. ITC Group is going to import 24 cryogenic containers with capacity to carry 20 tons of oxygen each. The IAF, Indian Air Force C-17, airlifts 4 cryogenic tanks from Singapore. And the Modi government ramps up remdesivir production from 70 lakh vials per month to 90 lakh vials per month. India is fighting back.
I think India is fighting back. The data that I have from various sources is that going back to the last quarter of 2020, each of the states were set aside a specific budget to augment their oxygen requirement. The COVID disease attacks the respiratory system. When it attacks the respiratory system, you have less oxygen supply than normal. And many of them suffer, and this thing propagates if the oxygen is not augmented and the lungs is not receiving enough supply, so which in turn affects your cardio system. So the point here is that they were given money, and each of the states were given money, and some of the states have implemented the oxygen augmentation programs. And what you now find is many of the hospitals in these top 12 states, there's complete lack of augmentation. There's no production facilities. I think Maharashtra and Delhi, more specifically, they're pointing out. Some of the other states have done. Even Ayodhya, which is a small place in UP, has got a hospital, 2 hospitals with enough oxygen supplies. And I think they've created a 2,000-bed facility when you take into account the situation in Maharashtra and Delhi. I'm told that there's only one facility that has been created out of the budgets that is allocated. This was taken up by Modi himself at the chief minister's meeting. Of course, in West Bengal, the Madam Chief Minister or the Madam Queen, she doesn't attend any of the meetings. She doesn't think that she's part of the union. Anyway, so I think this oxygen is a reflection that India as a whole, from corporations to infrastructure like airplanes and air and rail and so on, is ramping up their game to provide the logistical support to make sure that the oxygen is reaching the right places.
And in other news, Border Security Force foils attempts by Pakistani Drone to drop arms and ammunition, and Indian Navy begins the process to lease 24 light Navy helicopters for 5 years. So India is beginning to also prepare in an armed way, sir.
They're going about in 2. One up in the north, the whole logistics infrastructure, and it looks like they have fairly good army architecture in place from the 3 forces. Now with the Rafale planes coming in, and with the BrahMos missiles, as well as the light tanks and special moving tanks in those mountainous terrains, they seem to have augmented themselves. They recognize that in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific side, they need submarines. Plus, they also require more logistical capabilities in the carriers. So what you can see here is that the naval helicopters, which are light movement, is basically to move from land to the ships or land to the carriers. And so they're augmenting, they're thinking ahead and advancing the logistical plans in tune with this much advertised or much spoken rhetoric that there is an imminent threat that is looming around the Taiwan, which can easily spread. There is also a threat into the Philippines side. They're going to occupy that specific land. What Duarte does,
Duterte.
Philippine president, what he does, we don't know. But whether he will strike a deal or whether he will confront the Chinese in concert with their allies, which is United States and ASEAN, remains to be seen. But India is equipping itself because it will spill into India, or India may be called in to provide blockage and support, etc.
In markets news, stock futures are calm in anticipation of the big earnings this week. Earnings to watch for are Tesla, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and the FOMC meeting is going to be happening this week. What is your predictions for FOMC, sir?
The prediction for FOMC is no change in policy. We have been able to hold the bond rates. We have not still seen the uptick in employment numbers, the deeper uptick in employment numbers. We're going to wait and watch. But clearly 2021 is no interest rates, and we will continue to support the accommodative monetary policy that we have adhered to in support of the fiscal policy. So
You, you,
that is going to be Jerome Powell's speech.
you have practically written his speech for him, sir. And viewers, with that, we come to the conclusion of episode 149. Please do subscribe to our channel, do join our membership. And as always, it's a pleasure having you on the channel, Sridhar ji. We'll be back again tomorrow, bright and early. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.